Welcome to the Everyday Saint podcast. Today we have Lara, and I'm so excited because we have actually just had a couple classes together, and I don't think I've ever shared this with you, but I remember having classes with you maybe like a year ago and seeing you, and you always had the cutest outfits, and I was like, I want to be her friend. Like, anytime I'd see her, I was like, I don't know what to say, but like, she just looks like someone that I would want to be her friend. So I'm really excited to get to know you better through this, and just to hear all about what God has taught you. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Eve. And I remember astronomy class. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We go way back.
way back this time. Yeah, so why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your testimony?
Yeah. So like Eve said, my name is Lara. I'm a junior at Benedictine, and I'm from Minnesota, one of the many Minnesotans on campus.
Yeah.
With my faith journey, I guess it's had a lot of ups and downs, and growing up, I didn't really grow up in like a Catholic household per se. I wasn't really formed, and my first encounter with the Lord was on like a Catholic camp in middle school, and that was where I first learned what adoration was, and it was a really powerful experience. All these kids my age just worshiping the Lord and having such an incredible response really moved me, and that kind of like lit a fire in my heart for the Lord, and it was really incredible. Growing up, I went to public school, and so the faith definitely was not nurtured in that setting, especially when I was growing up in middle school. Things really took a turn, and it just was not, clearly we discerned that it was not for me, and it became extremely hard to reconcile this encounter that I had with the Lord and living it out in such a secular environment, but not only secular, but was kind of anti-religion or anti-Catholic. And so, and again, I was really new to the faith. All I held on to was the fact that like I knew that I couldn't thrive in this environment. And so we, after middle school, we made the decision to switch to a Catholic school, and it was really providential because we had just heard of this brand new Catholic school, Chesterton Academy. I had never heard of this school before, and it was a brand new school, and it was a classical Catholic school. Growing up, going to public school in my life, it was kind of funny. My thought of Catholic school was always like plaid skirts and like rulers and stuff, and I definitely had like a stereotype in my head. But I visited this school, and I just fell in love with it, and I knew that this was a place where where my faith could really grow. So had my first catechesis class as a freshman in high school. Had no idea, never really opened up scripture and studied it before, so that was really awesome. Very humbling experience because I felt a little bit behind, but yeah, very nurtured. And then from there, I guess I had big dreams. I still kind of held on to like my Big Ten public college dreams. I wanted to go to UW-Madison.
Oh my, I'm from Wisconsin, so
yeah,
I know.
Yeah. So I was like set, because my dad's from Wisconsin, and so growing up we'd always have family gatherings there. We go to Badger games. I had these like
the jump around, like you're ready.
Yes, I was like, I'm gonna be a Badger. I love this. This is an awesome, huge public school where I can really like thrive and just get my career started. I thought I wanted to do nursing and all this stuff. And yeah, I visited the school twice actually, and I was really set on it. I had this big plan, and a few months into my senior year, like kind of the second semester, I received a letter of deferment from Madison, and I was really like, whoa. I thought I could get in, or maybe, deferral's not a yes or no, but, it's like more of a maybe. And so I could just wait and see if I would be let in, or kind of explore my other options. And that was when I decided to take Benedictine more seriously, because at the time Benedictine was really my safety school. I was like, yeah, if all else fails, I'll go to Benedictine. And I came here for a visit a few months later, and I just completely did a 180. I fell in love with it. It's definitely the polar opposite of Madison.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
just in every sense of the word. And something about it just really resonated more with like my identity, and it seemed like it was more of a place for me, whereas UW Madison was somewhere I could have my dreams come true, or like these like ideas for my future. And so it's been really incredible to be formed in kind of at an older age, but still just so well, and then come to Benedictine and feel the Lord drawing me even deeper. Because something that I've come to learn was that intimate relationship is always going to grow deeper. It's never going to be fully satisfied here. And so it's been awesome to see how that has grown every day that I've been here. So in a nutshell.
Amazing. Yes. Yes, I don't know if you, like, as you were talking about this, because now you're studying theology, which, like, it's so cool that you went from, like, not even knowing, like, what to do, like, going to public school, and now you're studying theology, and that's so amazing, and it kind of makes me think of the Christ and Trinity class that I'm in right now. I don't know if you remember this from Dr. Rich's class when you took it, but he was saying how there's like this beautiful initial encounter with anything. Like a man and a woman meet and they fall in love and get married 50 years later, and no one gets married like the day after they meet. That would be unreasonable. Like reason tells us not to get married the day after you meet somebody. But they look back, 50 years down the line, happily married with the whole family, and they think to themselves, well, we could have gotten married the next day, but obviously we didn't. You had to live out history to make sure that this initial encounter was true. But the fact of the matter was, like, everything that their relationship was going to be, everything that they had was in that initial encounter with one another, because everything that the man was and everything that the woman was and could be was present there. It just you had to live out history and grow in that relationship with each other to make sure that it was true. But it was all there in that first moment. And I think that's beautiful to think about with our relationship with Christ, because here you are, like, in middle school at a summer camp, and you encounter Jesus for what I'm assuming kind of is like that first time of knowing, like, there's something here, or having that inkling. And I just think that's, like, amazing to think of, like, that little middle school you was encountering Jesus, and everything that your relationship was going to be was, like, present in that moment, but you had to live out history with Christ to know what the fullness of that was. And now it's like, in that moment, Jesus knew. He knew, like, this little Lara, he was like, I see you now, and little do you know that, like, down the road, like, you're going to walk with me and study me in your theology classes and go to Benedictine college, and who knows what now after we graduate and move on, but like this path towards sainthood, like Jesus knew that was all going to be there in that moment, but it's like you have to live out that life. And I think that's just a sweet thing to think of, like, man, like Jesus knew everything that was going to be in my life. Like he knew all of it. It is like walking with me to live out history and see what the fullness of this relationship could be. And I think I just, like, as you were talking, I was like, I can so see that in what your walk with Christ has looked like.
Yeah, and it's super comforting to hear that, especially when we're transitioning from kind of being an underclassman at Benedictine to approaching graduation. And of course the question is coming, what do you want to do after you're done? Like, what do you want to be? And knowing that the same is true when Jesus first encountered, or when we first encountered Jesus, he knew exactly, what that was going to look like. And so we should hold on to that truth of, like, no, Jesus knows. He has that in his hands, and that should give us hope and not despair of, like, he's not going to abandon us after all these years. Like, he's still with us.
Yeah, right. Like, never going to leave, never going to give up on us, because like, he knows what the fullness with him can look like. It's just our littleness that doesn't always realize what that will be. Do you feel like there is anything from that, like, middle school encounter of adoration that you can see how that's come to fruition now in your life?
I have to think about that.
I know.
Yeah.
It's a big question, because
Yeah.
I guess what do you think? Like, I know for me, thinking back to, like, what I would consider, like, my first, like, big encounter with Christ was on a retreat, and now, like, knowing, like, in that moment I was like, man, now I know that Jesus loves me and wants a relationship with me, and, like, seeing that now, and when I go to adoration, it's like I sit there and I'm with the one who I love and who loves me, and in that moment I don't think I could say that I loved Jesus because I didn't know who he was, but now it's like I've seen the fullness of what, like, that love, not entirely, like, I'm nowhere near, you know, the perfect love by any means. I mean, we won't know that until heaven, but even then it's like now I can see what Jesus was calling me to, even if I didn't know it then.
Yeah, I definitely think when I was in adoration, obviously I knew that the host was the Eucharist, but adoration is such a beautiful time of outside of the sacraments that you really just gaze on the Eucharist, and that is God. And I began to see the Eucharist in a different way after that, but during adoration, especially for the first time, it was incredible because I didn't really. It's kind of, our eyes are looking at a piece of bread, but but in reality, it's Jesus just veiled, and I think whenever I look at the Eucharist, whether it's in the Mass or during adoration, there's still that, like, I'm still looking at a piece of, like, how do I say this? Like, there's still that wonder and, like, how, Lord, you're here, and I'm looking at the same you as I did when I was in middle school. And there's, like, definitely that love that has grown from that, but there's still that mystery and wonder, like, that yearning of, I see you, Lord, and yeah, I desire you even more, and that you've, like, allowed that desire to grow, I think, in our relationship. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it does take grace to recognize and grow in that desire too, because I don't think it would be the natural human tendency to see a piece of bread and be able to convince ourselves that that's that's God.
Yeah, not by ourselves. Yeah.
No, like, no one would come up with that on their own, and I think that points to even a greater fact of the reality of, like, that has to be Jesus, because no one would think of that. No one would want that. No, you know, like, it seems so backwards, and the paradox of Catholicism that we're not cannibals, you know, and it's like we're consuming God, and that's, like, the radical trust that we have to have in God to know that that is Him.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And, like, in that moment, my 6th grade self had no idea, you know, the whole theology behind it, or the doctrine, you know, Christ and Trinity. We talk about the kenosis of the Son giving himself fully back to the Father and vice versa. I was nowhere near, you know, I had no catechesis at all, and yet there was something in me that just was drawn to it, and I couldn't explain it. There was no doctrine or theology that would convince me that was God. It was just this knowing, because I think inside, you know, like, we're made for God. Our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee. Like, there's this understanding that goes beyond words, beyond any teaching, that you just recognize in the Eucharist, whether it be a young child being told that that's Jesus in the Eucharist, or years down the road taking a lot of theology classes. It's still the same God, and the response is the same, and it doesn't, you know, and it's a blessing to take all these theology classes, because that definitely deepens it. But I think at the root of it, it goes deeper than any, like, academic class we could take, or any rational explanation.
Because almost the whole point of Christ was, like, we're taking these theology classes because we love them and we want to learn, and obviously God has placed a mission on our life that we're supposed to be studying theology, but God didn't come to the people who were studying theology. Like, He came to the people who were uneducated. And that's kind of the beauty of it. It's like, you don't have to be a theology major, or study it to know God. Like, you can know, like, the religious sense, again, Christ and Trinity. Like, the whole idea is that we all have a yearning to be loved. We all have a yearning to know what our purpose is, what our mission is, and it's, where does that come from? Well, that has to come from a creator. That has to come from something, that we all have this innate sense of something greater in our lives. And because we all have that, we're all on a mission to find it. And that, like, what we need to find God is already within us. And I think that's, like, a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
But it doesn't, I mean, yeah, you do have to, like, learn and sit with Him. And I love that you brought up St. Augustine. I think it's St. Augustine's quote, our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it looks like to be restless in God.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's such a deep question.
I know.
No,
like,
it's
pulling
true.
them all out.
It is true, yeah. I think growing up, I definitely was involved in a lot. My family's very busy and very involved, whether it was, piano lessons, violin lessons, sports, you name it, we were involved. And they were very life-giving things, and it was awesome to be able to express, our gifts and talents in these areas. And I think there's always, like, this thirst for knowledge and understanding and all these gifts. And then when the faith was really introduced to me, that kind of knowledge took a different dimension of that knowledge ultimately leads to God. It's not just knowledge as an end. And so I think, how do I say this? Sorry, I'm getting, like, flustered.
No, it's
Let me
okay.
think about it. Yeah. I think the more that I developed in these areas of my life, in these hobbies, I guess I learned how these things don't make me who I am, because while I loved doing all these things, they eventually led to, like, burnout. And it was definitely difficult to balance, like, my time and, like, glorifying these gifts and giving back to the Lord, and just, like, being a busybody and doing these things as, like, a means to an end. And yeah, I think I was really restless. I became restless because these hobbies, these activities that I would do became my identity and who I was. And instead of seeking the Lord through them, they became my identity and who I would show myself to God instead of just myself, just my heart. And I think I quickly started looking for my identity in these things rather than looking for my identity in God, and then using these hobbies and activities as an expression of how God made me, which everyone expresses these things differently. Some people express it, ice skating or studying engineering, you name it. I think that was really, really a turning point for me, especially at Benedictine, because there's endless things to be involved in, and they're all so good. And the trick of the devil is to make you think that your identity lies in what these material things, the thing that we see, and not the Lord. And so I think shifting that from the things that I do to just who I am as He created me has really helped me become satisfied in the fact that I will always be restless, and that's a good thing. But these things that I think will satisfy my restless heart, never will. Because that heart, like that I think we talk about it in Christ and Trinity, but that insatiable desire of the human heart can only be satisfied by something infinite, and that is our Creator. So
yeah, the infinite journey, like the fact that we can never be satisfied points to the fact that we're on a journey, and the fact that we're on our way to something. Because if we if we weren't restless, then we'd just be kind of sitting ducks, and what is all this for? Like, it has to be for something. There's no other option if we have, like, this, all have this feeling of, like, working towards something. Like, that's why we look for success in our careers and what we do, and who we hang out with. Like, there's this underlying emotion of how is this going to be more successful or more likable, or, you know, hopefully our goals as Christians is how is this going to bring me closer to God, and that's the root of it. And I think as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about the word restless, or like rest in general, and kind of the best example of it that I thought of was, it's like the moment where you're in the Mass and the priest holds up the host and he says, "This is my body given up for you." And I feel like that's just the part of the Mass where, like, everyone's hearts get silent in a way. Like, there's just something different about that moment, as there should be, because, I mean, that's where Jesus literally comes to the Mass. And I think that's where we find our rest. It's not in what we do, but it's like, Jesus, this is my body given up for you. This is my life given up for you. And I lay it all before you. Everything that I do, it's so that I can be closer to you. And that's not to say, like, quit your sports, quit your crafts. Like, I think those things are intended to be there so you can grow in the strengths that God's given you. And then, therefore, glorify Him through those things. Because to give God all the glory, like, in everything that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever struggled with, like, coming up, like, when you're doing activities? Because I know you like to do art a lot, and then it's kind of like, does everything that I do need to be for God? Like, does all your artwork have to be religious art? Or all the music you listen to, does it have to be Catholic music? Like, is that ever, like, something that you've kind of felt in that journey?
That question definitely has come up. Like, I've asked myself that a lot, because I know plenty of Catholic artists who just make religious art, and it's, like, totally beautiful. And I found that, and I would ask myself, like, maybe I should look into doing religious art, because I don't really do, like the content of my paintings normally isn't, like, religious. I do a lot of oil painting, and so I do a lot of copies of the masters, you know, John Singer Sargent, Monet, Jacques Ong, and so a lot of these, you know, masters, I think I've come to learn in my art history classes that there's a deep theology underneath it all, if it's not even if it's not explicit, even if it's not found in the church. There's this drawing back to the Creator, because as artists, we are like mini creators, in this, not in a blasphemous term, but we take in the beauty around us and we recreate it, and we, like, ascribe this beauty to what we see. You'll never see, like, an animal sitting, like, looking at a sunset and just really enjoying it, or like, oh, I wish I could paint a picture of that. We find something sacred in this creation that we just desire to ascribe to a canvas, because something about it moves our hearts, and even if it's not found in a church, like I said, it is part of creation, and what is creation but, like, points back to the Creator. And so, yeah, I found I've never felt myself needing to compare, you know, my art to, like, religious art or other Catholic artists. I think there's, just like how God made us, we all express our likeness with our Creator in different ways, and so do artists, and the content that they create. And yeah, and so it's just been, like, really awesome to see, in the art department and just outside of it, how unique every artist is and how they have their own touch, because we weren't all created to create the same art, because then it wouldn't have any meaning in it. And it's like our little fingerprint, and so it's kind of like our identity, which is how it makes us kind of like mini creators of, you know, God's fingerprint is in each one of us, and yet it's expressed differently. And similar with art, it's all expressed differently in the hands of the Creator. So yeah.
Wow, I love that idea so much. Like the like Oh man, I just, as you were talking, I was like, this is so beautiful to think of, because I can imagine, like, for those who are Catholic and also create things, because I know it wouldn't be the case for all artists that uh, didn't live like a Catholic lifestyle, but the closer that you grow to God, I bet the more authentic your art gets, because you're getting closer to, first of all, the Creator who created everything from nothing. And I mean, that's what you're trying to replicate. Obviously, not in a blasphemous way, but in a way that glorifies God. But also, like, learning about who you are better, and then who you are as an artist, and how can I draw that near to God? How can I learn about how intentionally God created me through how I'm now creating this piece?
Yeah, it's really cool, and yeah, and I don't, yeah, it's not, yeah, like you said, it's not blasphemous, and on our first day of watercolor class, our professor, he's new here, he said that something kind of shocking, but I really had to sit and think about it and talk to my roommates about it. He said that because a lot of art can be almost like photorealistic, and so you don't really know if you're looking at a photograph or a painting. And our professor said that that kind of art is almost blasphemous. And that was kind of like a scandalous, like almost scandalous thing to hear, because it's like, well, I'm surely these artists don't mean to blaspheme God, you know? And I really had to think about it. And art is different from photography, because art shouldn't seek to capture exactly what our eye is looking at. Art is an expression of what we see, combined with our experience with it. And so that's why when we look at a painting, we obviously know that we're not being fooled. We know that it's made out of pigment, done with like a palette knife or a paintbrush. But we know that the artist is trying to communicate something to us, something that only they see, because it's expressed uniquely through them. And so what I took from that comment was that when we try to make things photorealistic, as a camera would take a picture, we're no longer trying to express it, like the meaning and the beauty behind it. We're trying to almost equate it to how God sees it, because there's no unique touch to it, and it's simply the objective, how our eyes see it, if that makes sense. And when we try to create something that almost fools the viewer, we're almost trying to become gods, because we recreate reality exactly as it is, and art shouldn't fool people. It shouldn't confuse. And so yeah, that was just something interesting that I wanted to bring into my art, because there's this temptation to see photorealistic art and think that's really good, that's what I should aspire. If my painting doesn't look exactly like the photo, then I must have done something wrong, which is not how we should be looking at it. So
Right, especially this idea of, like, the experience with the art too is a large part of it, like, in your heart being in the art too, and like a part of you. And as like thinking about that with how God created us, like, he didn't just create us and that was that, like, thinking of how, if this is how you're making art and it's a reflection of how God created us, that means that God had to have an experience of creating us too. And somehow it's his little fingerprint, not little, but his fingerprint in our hearts when he created us. Because there has to be an element of us reflecting the Creator, just as your art.
yeah.
And that's so beautiful to think, like, so sweet, like, just a sweet thought to think of even God just looking at us and not just creating us, but having this encompassing love as he created us too.
Yeah, and I think when we do take God out of the equation of creating us, or we take God out of the equation of, out of the experience of making art, it loses its meaning. And I think especially like in the 20th and 21st century, we can see how art loses its meaning when we abandon God, from the Enlightenment and onwards. This kind of fragmentation of art, and we see that in our identities too, when there's no meaning ascribed to it, there's no beauty and there's no objective reality. And I think as an artist, especially now, it can be really discouraging to see art that has little to no meaning, or just no intention, being praised as high art, or something highly revered, and then to see the tradition of beauty and goodness and truth in art just kind of tossed to the side. I think there's definitely a war going on in the art world, so now we have to defend, and I think art reaches its full meaning when we have God, when God is the end. And I think, you can obviously see that plainly in modern art. Modern art strictly meaning the abandonment of God and theology. So
how do you feel like you bring in that, like, truth, beauty, goodness into your art, or even, like, for those listening, advice on how to stay true to their faith while creating?
I think it goes back to creating uniquely, and not trying to compare yourself to any other artist. It can be, to be a Catholic artist, you don't have to strictly paint iconography, and while I would love to learn how to do that someday, that is not, like, required, I think, because there is a deep theology in every painting that seeks to emulate beauty through truth and goodness. And so regardless if it's a picture of a saint or a landscape, there's still God's beauty and love reflected in that. As long as you're earnestly seeking truth, beauty, and goodness, and expressing yourself in a way that is true to yourself and how God made you. And that's going to look different for everyone. But yeah.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned the comparison, and I know something we've been talking about is identity, and those go hand in hand. Like, finding your identity while not comparing yourself to other people, because that is the slippery slip, and the easiest, like, sin almost to fall into is just seeing somebody and being like, oh, I wish my art was like theirs, or I wish my, like, eyelashes looked as good as theirs, like silly things like that, or like I wish I had a closet like theirs, like they always look so nice. And I was just wondering if you had maybe any experiences with that, and any advice on how to handle that.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think again, when we stop seeking our identity in God, we start looking for it in other things, whether that's popularity or money or you name it. It could be even like our jobs or careers or the people around us too. Relationships quickly can become, false idols. And I think with that, again, our hearts are made our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee, O Lord. And because our hearts are made for the Lord, they're not made for anything else. Everything, even, all the sacraments, they point us towards the heavenly reality. And I think re-examining where there may be some false idols in your life, and that can be really hard for us to do, and to go before the Lord and tell, lay down our bronze calves, and it is definitely hard, especially in this day and age. I think social media is a great example of creating an identity for yourself, ascribing things to your identity instead of receiving our identity as a gift from the Lord, not seeking it in anything, but using these hobbies, these talents, these gifts as a way to give back to God, not as a way of building ourselves up in our own identities, but even going before the Lord and saying, Lord, I give this back to you because I know that my identity is ultimately found only in you. And while these things can be very good things, they can also in themselves become false idols. And of course, like our intentions may be good, but it's always just helpful to be mindful of that. Because, Jesus says in the Gospels, you can't serve God and mammon. We can't both serve the Lord with all our heart and also be prey to these false idols. So
yeah, and even it's like something I bring up when I go out and give chastity talks is like I start out by talking about identity and respect for self, because from there like stems the virtues of chastity and sexual morality and knowing God, knowing thyself, and then being able to give that love to other people. And one of the things I point out, because I remember hearing this a couple different times, and it really struck me, because it's like if I were to ask you like, oh, like tell me about yourself, well, you're going to say, usually most people would say, oh, like if someone asked me that, I'd say I'm a Benedictine student studying theology and entrepreneurship. I have this podcast, I'm a chastity speaker, and those are things that tell you what I do, but they don't tell you who I am. And so I kind of posed that question in the talk, like if I were to ask you that, like what would you say? And I mean, no one's really going to answer this way realistically, but it's important for you to reflect on it in your heart. It's like, okay, I'm Eve, and I'm a daughter of God, and like he made me as someone who is compassionate and passionate about him, who's joyful and likes to organize and plan things and have a color-coded agenda. Things that form, like virtues that form us. It's truly who we are, rooted in who God made us to be. And then all of the things that we do stem from those virtues. But if we don't know what God has given us in those gifts, then we can't go on and give him glory in the things that we do.
Yeah, that's crazy you bring that up, because last week I listened to this podcast. I don't know if you've heard of the Logos podcast.
I have.
Yeah, these two seminarians. I just found it recently. It's really good. And they were talking about leisure. And so a couple weeks ago, it was super gloomy outside. And, everyone's just super tired and the week just seems to be dragging on. Well, last week, it was just a gorgeous week. It was the 50s and 60s. And I was just drawn to take walks every day. And I found this podcast and I decided to listen to it, and it was about leisure. And, I think we think of leisure as being lazy or doing nothing. And back to what you said, what do you do when you ask someone, hey, what do you do? That's typically what follows after introducing yourself. And we focus so much on the doing rather than the being. And their being is our actual identity, not our doing. And I think the reason I bring up leisure is because these men on the podcast were talking about leisure, worship being the highest form of leisure. And we normally don't think of leisure that way. Because when we are truly in accordance with our identity and we're living that out, we are connecting the most with God. And what's the closest we can get to God is in the Mass and receiving Jesus in the Eucharist. And I think it is very, especially in our culture of being a busy bee, it's hard to kind of give someone that response of, I'm Lara, I'm a daughter of God, I love the outdoors, and I love God's creation and witnessing that in the outdoors, and I want people to know Jesus just as much as I do, and if not even more. That'd be kind of strange if you responded that way, especially in our culture, but I think, actions follow our words, and I think, they inevitably will. If we keep speaking these things, we'll eventually start believing them, and if our identity is based on what we do, then we won't find our identity in God.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
I love that idea, and it makes sense that leisure is the highest form of is worship. because it's like that rest. It's
Mm-hmm.
where we seek rest. And like, where else can I rest but in the arms of the loving Father?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't, like, there's nothing else that will give you what you're seeking. And I am such a hypocrite for saying that, because it's like, okay, I'm such like an avoider when like I like being able to break down, like, okay, I'm feeling this way, let me go to adoration and journal about what's causing these things, get to the root of it and solve it, like problem solver. But then the second I start feeling like uncomfortable, I do not like that feeling and I go distract myself. So go into my work, go on my phone, scroll on social media for a while to numb and wait for those feelings to go away, or watch a movie and crochet and like things like that. And I am so silly, such a silly human for doing that, because I'm not going to find rest in anywhere but the Father's arms and in His embrace.
Yeah.
But I mean, that takes practice too.
Yeah.
Like
it goes back to St. Augustine. Our hearts are restless, and I think, and leisure, leisure can have a lot of different forms and look different. But I think definitely scrolling and just like scrolling is not leisure, because leisure ultimately wants to align us with reality. And when we're scrolling on our phones, we're actually distracting ourselves from reality. We're trying to just remove ourselves from whatever's going on, whatever uncomfortable thing might be bothering you, and just kind of numb that for a while leisure ultimately wants to bring us fully into reality, whether that be, taking a walk and really just, not listening to anything, not scrolling, but looking at the world around you and appreciating that. And I think, and there's so many different ways we can do this, but that was just the one that came to my mind, of leisure versus distraction. And I think as a culture we've definitely confused that, to the point where when we do engage in worship, the highest form of leisure, we're almost uncomfortable, like even at adoration, like we've distracted ourselves for so long that we don't know what it's like to be face to face with reality, and it's like we're not used to that. And I think it takes practice. It's not just going to happen overnight, but and it's kind of like a muscle that needs to be exercised. But I think the more that we exercise it, the stronger we become. The beauty that we see in real leisure and worship will bring us, to our ultimate identity, which is in God. But yeah, if we always distract ourselves from these truths, we're definitely going to be lost and just constantly searching. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That was so good. And I just want to challenge like anyone listening, because I know I would like hear you say that and be like, Lara, I do not have the time of day for leisure. And I want to encourage anyone listening, like, you actually do have the time. And the fact is that when you make time for leisure, you're actually making time for everything else. Like, all of a sudden when you have time to rest, you realize how much time you really have. But we get so caught up in our heads and caught up in everything that we need to do that we forget leisure, and then we're just stressed and anxious all the time. And the second that we do have time to rest, we go on our phones or whatever that vice is for other people. And if you can make time for true rest and true leisure, God will multiply your time like tenfold. But we have to like give Him those little seeds of faith, and He will move the mountains.
Just give Him your little yes. And it doesn't have to be, okay, I'm gonna have 2 hours today to just go on a hike. We have to be realistic with our current state in life as college students, because life will be busy, and it's probably going to get even busier after this, because a lot of us will go off and get married and have families, or pursue whatever vocation the Lord has gifted us with. But leisure, it's not a lot to find those pockets in your day for rest, because I think if we find time to be on our phones, then there's time for leisure, for true leisure. And instead of kind of filling in these uncomfortable moments where you're faced with being in reality and just kind of filling it with screen time or whatever it is that you distract yourself with, there is time to be found if we just are docile to it and pay attention. So.
Yeah. Well, Lara, this has been wonderful, and I just
Thank
hope.
you.
I feel like anyone listening to this podcast, it's like medicine for the restless heart, you know. Like, and I hope people walk away feeling convicted of letting their hearts rest and knowing that God is going to take care of them, like that they can lean into that and just sit with Him. And it's just been wonderful to talk to you. So
Thank you so much for having me. Oh my gosh.
Yay!